Sure tell all those damn live views are turned on. You're soaking up all the damn bandwidth.
Totally.
Yes. Thanks.
I apologize on behalf of television everywhere.
So is this all new? Everybody in here?
That's interesting.
Only the governor's office. I think there's some other Robin's more than some.
Okay. Is there any interested members of the public or people from,
I don't-
just officials and media then?
Less than officials.
Yeah, I think that's it.
It had been available to the public, right? Or not?
I don't know if this room was
What's your name?
Daniel Stewart.
S-T-W-A-R-T.
Yeah, STWART. Yep.
You're, do you have an official title?
General counsel.
Has the governor's office taken a position on this role?
So he's actually on a trade mission right now.
Yeah.
South America.
That's Sandoval, right? He's never spoken about this, or?
I don't believe so. Sire Sean Best.
Who's that?
The two sitting next to you.
Oh, the reporters?
Governor's drinking beer in Panama.
But he's not taking a position on the OJ parole question? Okay, all right.
No, I don't think he would normally, he just defers to his appointees to do what they think they should do.
ART
Yep.
and general counsel.
And you're the only official in here? Everybody else in here? Everybody else is part of the fake news media? We're all the enemy of the people here?
I think I'm just and I'm just here as an observing capacity.
Okay. Can't believe anything you're doing.
I don't have any official.
So you're just merely the governor's rep in this? That's it? You're just merely the governor's representative for this?
Yeah, just here to observe. In case I get something happens. Texas me.
How you doing?
Good, good. What happened?
Back here now for the interim?
Yeah, for the interim staff.
Yeah.
No, the other place that you hold.
That's right, I'm on hiatus from the other place.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
With all you guys here, why do I have to be the pool?
Right now, I wish I was sitting out there somewhere getting a live stream.
Yeah, right. I'd rather be doing.
Our web system here is like,
Yeah, this is kind of really off and on.
not working very well.
Sandoval.
Okay.
Brian Sandoval.
It's ironic that you can get it better 100 miles away.
Right.
No disrespect to the parole division, it's just the way it is.
Shit, gotta get the best seat in the house.
Can we do this? If I let a camera in, great. Here's the pool camera. Okay.
Central and South America. He's going to Panama first.
That under Brian sounded like your ward.
Okay.
According to experience, I've heard wonderful things about you. Thank you. Mhm. Yes, and it's done. It's done, and she's perfect. And now we can go on to normal life with a 4.5 to 7 month. Thank you.
7 months.
Thank you. It was called 6 weeks in an ICU with hospital food.
I can't even imagine.
Oh. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. She's adorable. Yeah. It's nice that Connie
If she could find me one of the but it's a blessing.
I'm gonna ask you for the innocent.
Okay.
Okay, one thing I'd like to go over with everybody. Basically, you can see that the board is sitting and looking at the monitor behind everybody. We'd like you not to take your cell phone and take pictures because that movement will distract the board. If you have a cell phone, if you can put it on as silent mode as you possibly can, and obviously you can record audio if you like. And all the pictures that are going to be taken will be available online on the Dropbox account, besides the ones that AP is pushing out. So, does anybody have any questions? Not, I mean, just general questions that are, okay, good. All right.
Is lunch provided?
Pardon?
Lunch provided?
Cookies.
We have cookies. Would you like a cookie? We have cookies.
I do actually have a question. The number of reporters that are here, like the breakdown of the people that are watching, do you have?
In this room? We have Nevada Appeal photographer, Stephen Gregory from iHeartMedia, Michelle
Fox.
Brewer from Fox News. He's the video poll reporter. And actually, I should mention to them as well, when they break to deliberate, Michelle will go out to the door, and he'll be available for any of the cameras to go up and talk.
And so will Steve. He
And Steve, okay, yeah.
And
any of
also
the-
other Steve if you'd like to.
Okay. And then we have Reno Gazette-Journal, Las Vegas Sun, Las Vegas Review-Journal, and Associated Press, and CNN, and Reuters. And Reuters is the print poll reporters, but just the press.
And then the other folks that are independent?
Interested parties.
Thank you very much. Okay, so it's a TV and.
Oh, yeah, all of the things that.
Oh, goodness, that's, thank you.
Yeah, I like.
We'll see what she does. She's usually fine.
Are you ready now?
She should be.
Are you ready? Check. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let me talk from the other mic. Check. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Audio check. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Audio test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and just so you know, once they conclude the first part of the hearing, we're going to let the board leave, and then once they've gone to another part of the building, we'll let you guys go out to talk, and then we'll be coming back on, giving everybody a 5-minute heads up to come back in.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
So when the board, the 4 panelists who are being present, when they leave to confer after the hearing is concluded, will they just be conferring among just the 4 of them? And if they reach a majority decision, an unanimous decision among the 4 of them, then it'll be their decision, or will the 2 others who are watching in from Las Vegas participate from the start, or?
They will come out, they will not decide in private, they will come out and vote publicly.
So vote out here?
Correct.
Okay, so they're just gonna be consulting, they're not actually holding a vote there?
Correct.
Decision will actually come here?
That's correct.
All right, so if the 4, let's say all 4, let's say there's 3 and 1 way or the other, and then you need to conference, then the other 2 have to take part,
Correct.
and what happens then?
Very likely we can dial directly into the office, and they're standing by in Las Vegas, so.
Okay. They're gonna watch the whole hearing, or they actually
Yeah.
watch it?
They're not watching this video stream, they're watching a live stream. Okay, so this is your 5-minute heads up. I've got to unmute.
Do you want me to make your remarks here?
No. Okay, Lovelock, this is your 5-minute heads up. We'll be coming in the room about 9:59 for a 10 o'clock start.
Thank you.
Hey, David, confirm you said yesterday that if you are possible member of the commission might actually give comments.
You can see how big the room is. They never showed me how big this room was until you actually used it for the conference room. It's a pretty good size. Yeah, it seemed like you must have had more stuff because I saw it as a much smaller room.
Tissues.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Laura Harris with ABC Action News. What we're waiting for right now, we just got the 5-minute warning, is for OJ Simpson's parole hearing. So much surrounding this case right now. OJ actually turned 70 this month. He was sentenced to a minimum of 9 years and a maximum of 33 years. But again, if he gets this parole today, he will be released probably in early October. Now, he's in prison for a different crime. Of course, he was acquitted of the murder of his then wife and her friend, Ronald Goldman. That happened in 1995, but he's in prison for a Las Vegas 2007 incident that involved armed robbery, kidnapping, serving this time at the Lovelock Correctional Facility in Nevada. Again, he's eligible for parole in October if he is granted it today.
Talking forever, you know? Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks.
What do you all think? Those of you who are joining us right now on Facebook, what do you think about this? Do you think that OJ Simpson should be able to walk free early? Again, he had to serve a minimum of 9 years up to 33 years. Do you think that he should still be staying in? I mean, basically, what the charges were and what he was eventually convicted of was stealing back memorabilia that was his, he claimed that was his, that ended up in Las Vegas. And just to give you a little background here, there's a chance that OJ Simpson could end up in Florida if he does get his parole today. And I say that because he's got family who lives in the Florida area. At last check, his children were living possibly in the Tampa Bay area, so there's a chance that he could be headed this way if he is if he gets that parole today. There are even talks that OJ Simpson might be getting a reality TV show if he were to be released from prison. All of that according to TMZ. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. So we've got plenty of people entering into the parole hearing now. Looks like everybody is seated.
Yes.
We just got the 2-minute warning for this one, so hopefully we will be getting get started in about 2 minutes. And I'm being told that OJ will actually be appearing in this parole hearing via conference from the prison. So hopefully in the next minute we'll have this started.
Go for it. Good morning. This is the time and date set for the Orenthal James Simpson parole hearing. Lovelock, can you hear me?
Also showing the screen, the room in Lovelock Prison, that's about 100 miles away from Carson City, where O.J. Simpson will speak to the commissioners via an uplink. I believe the chairman of the Board of Parole Commissioners, Connie Bisbee, is speaking right now. Let's listen in.
Good morning.
There on the right.
This is Officer Batista. Lovelock Correctional Center caseworker LaFleur.
Okay, gentlemen.
We're joined by his lawyer, Malcolm
What we're going to
Laverne.
be doing this morning is after the two of you leave the area and back to where you're going to be, I'm going to have Officer Batista, I'm going to have you bring Mr. Simpson in. And
Chairwoman Bisbee is now speaking to Lovelock, Texas, to the Lovelock prison,
if you'll keep your camera right there,
trying to
that'll
work through
allow
some of the
us
logistics. We do expect to hear from O.J. Simpson. I'm here with Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst. And Dan, you were saying earlier, there's almost no win for O.J. in speaking to this board.
That's right. He can only hurt his case. Meaning, no matter how good he is, it's not going to sway them. The only issue, I think, is does he say something wrong? Does he not express remorse enough? Does he somehow revert back into relitigating this?
Because failing that, this board, which also granted him parole on other charges back in 2013, is very likely to give him parole, and that means he could go free as early as October 1st.
Well, that's right. Except remember, though, that when he was granted parole on the last charges, there was no chance he was going to walk out a free man. And so the stakes are much higher. Now, as a technical matter, that shouldn't change the formula, and there's literally a formula that they're going to use. 11 factors with pluses and minuses and numbers and risk assessments. And if they stick to those numbers as closely as they did the first time, when he was deemed to be a low risk, he probably is getting out.
One thing they cannot consider, the 1994 murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, as we see O.J. Simpson walk in to the hearing room right now. Looking more fit than we've seen him in past years. He is joined by his lawyer, Malcolm Laverne.
Thank you.
Let's listen in to the chairman.
And you are James Simpson?
Correct.
And Mr. Simpson, will you please give me your NDOC number for the record?
1027820.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Simpson. And you're represented by whom this morning?
Mr. Malcolm Laverne, my attorney.
Okay, and welcome, Mr. Laverne. Mr. Simpson, the
Simpson,
first thing I'm
70
going
years
to
old.
do is put on the record your notice of this hearing and advisement of rights and ask you if you will recognize your signature for me, please.
Yes, I believe, yes.
Okay, thank you. Having recognized your signature, I'll declare for the record that you've been properly noticed and will go forward. I am Chairman Bisbee.
Okay.
With me this morning to the right is Commissioner Endel. To my left is Commissioner Jackson, and then to her left is Commissioner Corda. We're seeing you this morning.
Dan, as we listen in, there are 4
aggregated
commissioners right there, 2 more listening in from Las Vegas, and it will take a majority of those 6 to vote on parole.
Right. So if it ends up being a 3-3 tie, because there's one retired member who they haven't filled the spot yet, so there's 6 members. And so if it ended up being a tie, he would get another parole hearing in 6 months from now. But he does need that majority of 4. And remember, the 4 agreed last time, which is why they have 4 there. In theory, they end up agreeing on the decision and they move forward. If they need the other 2, if there's a divide there amongst the 4, they then check in with the other 2 to see if they can resolve it.
Let's listen back in.
Enhancements include both to the kidnapping and the robbery charges, even though they're not necessarily the way I've said it, make that clear. And a caseworker LaFleur, I have a parole eligibility date of October 1, 2017, with a current expiration date of September 29, 2022. Is that correct?
October 1st, the earliest day that O.J. Simpson could go free if the parole board does indeed grant him parole. I'm also here with Deborah Robertson. Deborah, as we keep an eye on this, this is over a crime he committed back in 2007, an armed robbery in Las Vegas.
A robbery that a lot of his buddies say they didn't even know was going to be a robbery, George. They thought they were going to a hotel room to act tough, to try to get some of his memorabilia back. And a lot of the guys with him that night said only in that moment did they realize, oh no, this is a robbery.
I want to make that clear.
Here comes the questions.
However, since we have a crowd of people here that have not taken advantage of our public meetings before in order to attend a hearing, some of the things I'm going to say are going to get a little bit lengthy. So you will understand everything, but it will be new information for some other folks. So just wanted to let you know that from the get-go. So I will tell you that as appointed members of the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners, we have an ethical duty to consider each inmate for parole in a fair and consistent manner. Like other parole boards across the country, our responsibilities include needing to balance prisoner rehabilitation with public safety, as well as taking action that considers the interests of justice. So that's what we're doing here this morning. We have adopted a guideline to assist us in making consistent decisions. We apply the elements and factors of our guideline to each inmate being considered for parole. A component of the guideline is our risk assessment.
The board uses a scientifically developed, validated risk assessment as part of its parole guideline. The risk assessment helps us determine which inmates are more or less likely to return to prison if we release them on parole. Using a risk assessment is not unique to Nevada, as a number of other state parole boards also use them. We have revalidated our assessment 3 separate times in the past 14 years, and it has consistently shown to be predictive. Using this risk assessment has significantly improved our overall performance. I'm going to go over each of those items of the risk assessment with you at this time. And just as an aside, this risk assessment is being revalidated even as we speak by the JFA Institute. So it's pretty darn predictive is the bottom line here. So my first question for you, Mr. Simpson, were you arrested for the first time at the age of 24 or older?
I was arrested for the first time, I think, at the age of 46 or 47.
Okay, so you were over the age of 24.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And am I correct that you have never been on parole or probation before, therefore you have never had a parole or probation revocation?
That is correct.
Okay. And I have that you were unemployed at the time of this offense because you were in retirement status.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, this is a property conviction. We're currently hearing you on the robberies and the enhancements. And so you have been assessed as a property offender. Now, we've also assessed you as having a substance abuse problem. I'll tell you why that is. You have indicated also in the past that alcohol had a big factor in this particular crime. And the fact that you have spent the last almost 9 years in prison because of an alcohol-related incident would be indicative of having some sort of at least temporary substance abuse problem. So we have scored you with having some history there. We have you as male, and we have that you are currently, well, very recently turned 90 years old. 90, I'm sorry about that.
I feel like it, though.
How about we take 2 decades off and call you 70? We don't have you as having any gang affiliation, nor has the NDOC found you to have any gang involvement. We do note that you have completed one of the vocational trainings in having completed the computer application course. We note that you have not had any disciplinaries, either current or pending, and that you're currently medium level there at Lovelock Correctional Center. Would you say that all of those items are correct, sir?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you do score out. Your risk score scores you in a low risk. However, because of your particular offense, that severity is the highest. When we combine your risk score along with your offense severity, our guideline recommendations are that we consider factors. Now, what consider factors means is we consider everything in terms of whether or not you're a risk to reoffend and return to our criminal justice system. And so what we do at this point, when we're looking at the risk score, we also look at what are called aggravating and mitigating factors. Now, aggravating and mitigating factors don't include everything in the world. They're very specific as to what we consider under those items also. So under the aggravating and mitigating factors in your particular case, we have mitigating or positive things for considering you for parole is the fact that you've been disciplinary free throughout your entire period of incarceration. You don't have any prior conviction history. You have community and family support. You have what appears to be stable release plans. You have participated in programming, some rather significant programming. On the aggravating factors, and the only thing that fits under our aggravating characteristics in terms of risk in your situation is that
As
at the
Chairman
time of
Bisbee
this
goes through
offense,
this question,
your
we'll bring
victim
Dan Abrams
indicated that they
back
were
in here. And
feared
let's
for their
explain
safety,
basically what she's just gone
having
through
been
in this
threatened
direct
with a gun during
questioning
the commission of a
of
crime.
O.J. Simpson, relatively
so those
gentle
are
questioning.
the risk aggravating, mitigating
Yes,
things we are
and
considering.
they are
That's
now
your overall
talking
risk
about
score.
aggravating,
Right
meaning
now, I'm gonna
reasons
stop
that
talking for a
they
while
might
and
not be
ask
able to
the
grant him
members of the
parole,
panel if they
mitigating
might have any
reasons to grant him parole, and you could hear him making it very clear that there are a lot more
Mr. Simpson,
mitigating
you've
than
lived most of
aggravating.
your life in the public spotlight. Yet you go into a hotel room in Las Vegas, bring along 4 other men with you. 2 of them are armed, and rob the 2 victims of property. What were you thinking?
Well, this might be a little long. I'll try to be brief with it. I had been contacted by a man named Ricio. He had contacted me over a period of time, told me that there was some guys that was trying to get him to fence my property, and he thought I should come and get it. Well, I kind of blew him off because I'm really not interested in football property. I don't collect memorabilia, only my own personal items. He was pretty persistent in calling me, and finally I told him, well, see if you get pictures of what they have. He sent me some pictures, and what I saw was my family, my mother's albums, pictures of my kids growing up, certificates of accomplishments of mine, pictures of what I call significant famous people, letters of myself. So I told him I would really like to get this stuff. So after a period of time, through what he described in court as the perfect storm, we all ended up in Las Vegas. You know, I was there for a wedding, and he told me that the property was there. And would I like to try to get the property? I said, of course I would like to get the property. He told me the names of what he thought were the people in the room, and I realized these are friends of mine. You know, actually guys who helped me move and store some of this stuff, right? So on the day of this incident, he came to my hotel to talk about how this would take place. I told him I met with a lawyer last night, and my sister and my daughter and some other friends, and discussed it. I pointed out another lawyer that was at the poolside as a part of this wedding party that was going on. I said I discussed with him, and they told me that I can't do this. If we're going to their home or even to their storage, OJ, you cannot go in there, because if they ask you to leave, you got to leave. I said, Ricio, you got to get him to bring it to a public place. He said, well, let me see what I can do. All of this has been testified to, so I'm not just going, you know. He called me and told me he told them to bring it to his room, and he's going to have it brought to his hotel, and would I come and get it? I said, of course I'll come and get it. He says, a lot of stuff, OJ, you better bring some friends. Well, I had a couple of friends there at the wedding that was going to go with me. He also said you should bring security. And I said, well, I know these guys, I don't think I need any security. I mean, it turns out that one of the guys, Bruce here, I didn't know it was him. I thought it was another guy named Mike, a friend of his, an ex-partner of his. But I said, I don't need any security. Well, later that day, when they arrived at his hotel and spread it out my property, he called and he said, they're here. You come here, I'll meet you in the lobby. And you need security, OJ. This guy, Beardsley, big guy, and he's a little weird. You know, I think anybody that knows him knows he's a little different. I still told him this guy is not dangerous, man, but he says, man, bring some security. During the day when he was there, he met people from the wedding, and one guy, McClinton, said he did security in Las Vegas, and it would help his business if he could have me as a client. I told him I didn't need him, but after he insisted that I bring security, I said, I can use your help. I went to the hotel. I met Mr. Ricio in the lobby. The 2 guys, they also met us there, which was a big mistake, obviously. I realized that quite soon after this. And Mr. Riccio led us to his room, put the key in the door, and let us in. I know I've seen the last 2 or 3 days the media reporting we broke in the room. Well, we didn't break in any room. Mr. Riccio brought us into that room. When I came into the room, I noticed spread out everywhere was my personal property. You know, the only thing I saw that was on display that wasn't mine was some baseballs, and I made it clear to everybody, those are not mine. All I want is my property, and I think there's a tape of it. You hear me on at least 3 or 4 occasions say, I just want my property. Go forward and try to make it a little quicker. At some point, we started, when we're leaving the room, actually I was being pushed out of the room by the security guys, because while I was in there and I recognized Bruce was there, I was surprised to see him as he testified. I was shocked really to see him. Bruce has been a friend of mine. He's traveled with me. We've done a lot of business together over the years. And he and I said, man, what are you doing here? You know, he explained to me why he was there and why he had my property there. And I told him, but geez, you should have told me. I accepted, I understood why. You know, it was 06, 07. People were losing their homes. A guy owed him money, couldn't pay him the money, gave him my property to sell. I told him I understood that, but you still should have told me. We had a chance to talk about this at a later date, and he apologized. I accepted his apology. I apologized for these 2 guys that got pointed a gun at him. He's traveled with me. He's known me when I've had security. He's known me when a venue has supplied security, and there were times he even had to get security for me. He knows I would never, ever direct anybody to point a gun at him or even threaten him. I've never done this in my life. I want to point out, you mentioned all those gun charges. Bruce and Alfred, they made it clear during the trial that I had no weapon. They didn't feel threatened by me, and from what you said, and that I didn't threaten them. It was the other 2 security guys that did that. And I haven't made any excuses in the 9 years that I've been here, and I'm not trying to make an excuse now. They were there because of me, you know. But in no way, shape, or form did I wish them any harm. As I was leaving the room, and this was on the tape too, Bruce said, OJ, hey man, there's a box that's with that stuff. They're Montana prints. Those don't belong to you. Those are mine, man. He told me that because he recognized everything else that I took out of that room was mine, you know? And he also recognized that I wasn't there to steal his stuff, and he knew I would return whatever was his, and which I attempted to do. I told him we'll leave it at the desk. I'll send you stuff at the desk. We didn't know at the time that this security Alexander had stole his BlackBerry, you know, phone, but the minute I saw that, I made him send it back, and he gave some cockamamie story in the trial that why he didn't take it back. In any event, I'm no danger to pull a gun on anybody. You know, I never have in my life. I've never been accused of it in my life. Nobody's ever accused me of pulling any weapon on them. And Bruce knows that I would never do that. I never have. I want to also, as a postscript, add that, you know, when I got to Lovelock, the state of California took up the issue of whose property it was. They did an investigation, and they came to the conclusion that it was my property. They turned it over to me. I have it now, you know? So, I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling that they turned over to me property that I'm in jail for trying to retrieve. You know, it was my property. I wasn't there to steal from anybody. And I would never, ever pull a weapon on anybody. So you believe the property? It's been ruled legally by the state of California that it was my property, and they've given it to me.
My question was, that's why you went into the hotel room, because you believed that the property was yours.
Yeah,
right?
You know, whenever he was just telling me, when Riccio was calling me, just telling me this, I wasn't interested. It wasn't until he got actual pictures of what they supposedly had, and because it was family photos and stuff, that's when I got interested in going there, and I only went there to retrieve my own property.
So what were you thinking when the guns were being brandished?
Well, I didn't see the guns, Brian. I didn't see, you say guns, as I understand it, one guy who was behind me somewhere pointed a gun at him. So I never saw him brandish a gun. When I left here, I called back to the room to ask Bruce, you said that there was some pictures, what do you have? And I asked him, did this Walter Alexander return his cell phone? He told me no, and he says, OJ, it wasn't cool that guy pointed a gun at me. I said, who pointed a gun at you? He says that kind of described who it was. And to be honest, I didn't really believe him at the time. I asked the 3 guys I was with, they all said they didn't see him do it. I got back to my hotel, we waited for these 2 security guys to show up. And the minute they drove up, the first thing I said, man, did you pull a gun in that room? And he swore, no, I haven't, he didn't. And I asked Walter Alexander for the cell phone, and he kind of threw the cell phone to me. But I wasn't aware until I was in the car driving back to our hotel that this guy had actually pointed a gun at him. Now, earlier in the day when he was talking to me, trying to get me to let him come, I didn't hire him. He said it was for free and all of that. He did show me. I didn't know this guy. You know, I knew the Alexander guy, but I didn't know this guy. He showed me his license. He showed me his CCR. You know, I've assumed that state gives a guy a CCR and stuff. They vetted him. I should have vetted him. I didn't really need him. I knew these guys weren't dangerous.
Well, your version of the offenses differ a little bit about the official records, Mr. Simpson, but moving forward here, considering the fact that what we have on record, weapons were brandished, you were there, property was taken.
Oh, I was there. I mean, I'm sorry.
So, the question is for you, is what do you think was the impact on your victims?
Well, I know what the impact was. I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, Mr. Beardsley, we had long talks back then. He told me that he had tried to call my lawyer. He testified in court that he had called my lawyers and tried to tell them in the months previous that guys had my property and they were trying to sell them, but my lawyer never called him back. He actually testified for me, I'm sure you know, during the trial. Bruce and I talked, and you know, Bruce was traumatized by it. Fortunately, as I said, we talked it out. He knew that I would have never condoned what happened. He accepted my apology, and I told him that these guys should be put in jail. If they did that, you know, I wasn't going to defend them. Unfortunately, they got a get out of jail free card when they say OJ told me. Nothing I could do about that. But I want to point out that, you know, Bruce, I knew his family. I mean, when his mother was terminally ill, I'd call, she was a fan, I'd call her and sing to her. The night before or the night of the jury's verdict, his son actually called me and tried to give me a head up on something to do with memorabilia and told me that he and his mother was cheering for me. You know, this family knows that I wouldn't wish any harm on these guys, ever. These guys are friends of mine, and I'd like to think we're friends again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Simpson.
Good morning, ma'am.
I conducted your last hearing in 2013 with hearing representative Mr. Robin Bates. Do you recall that hearing?
Yes, I do.
All right. At the time, we asked you what your plan would be if we were to grant you 2-year consecutive sentence. And you told us that you were going to complete commitment to change. Have you done that?
No, I haven't. At one point, I couldn't take the course. You know, I took 2 courses that I guess you guys don't give much credit to. It's called Alternative to Violence. I think it's the most important course anybody in this prison can take because it teaches you how to deal with conflict through conversation. I've been asked many, many times here to mediate conflicts between individuals and groups. And it gave me so many tools how to use it to try to walk these guys through, you know, not throwing punches at one another. Also, at one point, a couple of guys came to me and they said, OJ, I understand you're a Baptist. We're Baptists and we have no Baptist service here. Can you help us get a Baptist service here? I worked with them. We now have an ongoing Baptist service that's well attended. I attended religiously, and Pontius attended. And I realized in my 9 years here that I was a good guy on the street. I'm sure when Bruce get here, he'll tell you I was always a good guy. But I could have been a better Christian, and my commitment to change was to be a better Christian.
All right, thank you. Well, we do know that you have programmed over your term of incarceration. You have completed victim empathy, alternative to violence, both basic and advanced, and computer application. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about victim empathy and alternative to violence, and how it will benefit you in the future.
Well, as I said, the alternative to violence courses, I've always thought I've been pretty good with people, and I've basically spent a conflict-free life. You know, I'm not a guy that ever got into fights on the street and with the public and everybody, but as I said, they give you a bunch of little tools about how to talk to people instead of fighting, instead of throwing punches. Tools that I've used here that, you know, is how you talk to people, it's the tone that you use. The victim empathy was, once again, I didn't really see that in this case. I didn't really see that Alfred Beardsley was really affected by it all. But Bruce was affected. You know, Bruce was, I saw that he was affected, and as I said, I would have done anything not to have that happen. If for no other reason. I regret this because he had to have this guy point a gun at him. And he told me, he said, man, the guy put a gun in my face. You know, and I said, as I said in the beginning, I didn't believe it, but I know it's to be a fact now. So, you know, and that empathy course, it pretty much tells the guys who's all there, you know, they have you talk to your victim and what would you say to him, you know, if you were to see him now, and for you to take, you know, responsibility for what you did and to recognize how it affected their lives. As I said, Bruce expressed to me how it affected him, and as I told him, I couldn't be more apologetic for him going through that.
Thank you. I know that alcohol was a factor in the instant offense. Have you addressed this issue as you stated you would?
Well, you know, I think I made it clear back then, I've never had an alcohol problem. And if I took that alcohol course, it would have been more, you know, for my children, in case they ended up having a problem. Well, my kids don't have a problem. I don't think anybody's ever accused me of having an alcohol problem or any kind of substance problem. Of course, on that day, I had drinks on that day, but it was a wedding celebration. But I've never had a substance problem at all. So I didn't.
Okay, well, you told us in our last hearing that you were going to attend AA, and that's the reason for my question. Was a factor in the instant offense. Hadn't you been drinking that day?
Yes, as I said, we were celebrating a wedding thing. I felt that the alternative to violence course and my involvement with the church, I also as recently became the commissioner of the softball league, 18-team league. My primary responsibility was rules enforcement and you know, player deportment. You know, guys, it's hot, the guys play, they argue. My job is that they get surly with one another to remove them from the game, and if it goes beyond that, to go to Coach Fraley and have them suspended. I've never got any blowback from the guys because they know that I've done the best that I can, and I'm just trying to keep them out of trouble. So my agenda was full. You know, here I've been active, totally active in all the years I've been here. I don't have much time to sit around and do anything.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
So of all of the programs that you've had an opportunity to complete, what do you believe is the most significant for you personally?
Well, for me personally, it was alternative to violence. As I said, I think that should be mandatory for every inmate here. You know, once again, guys get hot here, and you know, we've had our share of fights here, and as I said, I've been called in sometimes to try to keep guys from fighting. And you have groups, you know, it's the Serenos are fighting, the Northtown boys, they all, I mean, it's crazy. And most of the time it's over something really, really stupid. You know, in a basketball game, somebody will say something to somebody, or somebody will go to somebody to complain to them about it, and it's how they complain to them about it that actually initiated the conflict, you know, the fights. So I for the life of me, I don't understand why that is not a mandatory course for everybody here. Excuse me, my mind is trying to think of other things, but that's the course that I would recommend to everybody. I mean, I took a computer course here, not because I was computer illiterate, but I took the computer course because I sometimes I could never get my kids on the phone, but if you text them or send something to them on a computer, you can get them. So I actually took that course so I could better communicate with my children.
All right, and have these programs prepared you to return to the community setting?
I believe so. You know, I've missed a lot of time, like 36 birthdays with my children, and you know, I spent the 12 years leading up to this incident in Vegas raising two kids in LA. I mean, I'm sorry, in Miami, and you know, with all the media stuff, you know, we got these guys like Jeffrey Felix making up stories and stuff. That was happening out on the street also. But I was able to keep their eye on the ball. They had great grades. They went to the college of their choice, and I ended up missing their graduation because of it. Trust me. I wish it would have never happened, but as I said, the courses that I take, and I hope it helps me more if I run into those conflicts with my kids. I'm not a guy that has conflicts on the street. I don't expect to have any when I leave here, but I feel that I'm much better prepared. But more so from, I think, my commitment to being a better Christian, because I thought I was a good guy. I had some problems with fidelity in my life, but I've always been a guy that pretty much got along with everybody.
Are you humbled by this incarceration?
Oh, yes, for sure. As I said, I wish it would have never happened. I was going to start, I didn't know how we were going to do this, by apologizing to the people of Nevada, because I wish this would have never happened. I apologized to them at my sentencing. You know, there's nothing I can do about this kind of media circus that's going on right now, but I could do something about the whole thing in the beginning. If I would have made a better judgment back then, none of this would have happened. And I take full responsibility, because I should have never. I haven't made any excuses in 9 years. But I should have never allowed these alleged security guys to help me, because it turned out they were only trying to help themselves. If they weren't there, Bruce and I, we tried to do this. We tried to sit down in the room and call this guy Mike Gilbert and discuss it all, but these guys took over and we were unable to do that. If we were able to do that, you would have never heard about this. None of us would be here today.
Dan Abrams, about 30 minutes in, he finally gets to where he wanted to begin. What apology?
Yeah, this is not helping him in its entirety. The goal should be just contrition, talking about how he's going to be better in the future, and instead it sounds like he's really...
Consider your 1995 acquittal and the subsequent civil judgment. However, these items will not be considered in this case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Hi, Mr. Simpson. When we grant offenders parole, one of the conditions of parole we will impose is a court order restitution. In this case, you and your co-defendants were ordered to pay $3,500
and return 12 Montana lithographs to the victims. Can you tell us the status of the restitution and the return of the property taken during the robbery?
Well, one, I was unaware of the restitution. I do know about the prints. When I was talking to Bruce on the phone and asking him, was there anything else that should be yours? He said, the cell phone, right? So I said, do you want to come and meet us with that, or or how do you want to do it? Mr. Cashmore, now the guy I didn't know, Mr. Cashmore said, hey, I got to go by that hotel. I'll drop it off, right? He testified to this too. This is not an allegation from me. Mr. Cashmore testified to it. So I say, hey, this guy is going to come back. He's going to drop it off at the hotel. His testimony later was that he didn't remember the name of who he was supposed to drop it off to, and that they had decided to screw OJ. We're going to keep this stuff. I mean, this is his testimony in court. The last thing I heard is that he actually tried to use those prints I can't find the word, to get his bail with his bail bondsman. He was trying to use it as I can't think of the word.
The restitution
for his bail bondsman. The last that I know of these lithographs was that this Cashmore had him. I didn't know this guy, that he had him, and he testified to the fact in court that he had him.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah. The restitution was paid by my lawyer. Yes.
So the total restitution has been paid, and there is no pending.
Yes.
The property has been returned to the lithographs as well.
I have no idea what this guy is. Oh yeah, he says that they have been returned to him.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Bruce just signaled me that they have been returned to him.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. If granted parole as opposed to completing your sentence in prison, you will be under supervision in the community. Why is it better to be in the community than in the prison?
Well, you know, I kids. I've missed a lot of time with those kids. I think I am a guy who's always been a giving guy. I've even on the street. People have always come to me. My reputation has always been that I'm open to the public. I'm open to everybody. Right now I'm at a point in my life where all I want to do is spend time with as much time as I can with my children and my friends, and I'm not looking to be involved with the media. I've had so many offers for interviews when I've been here in Lovelock, and I've turned them all down. I'm not interested in any of that. I've done my time. I've done it as well and as respectfully as I think anybody can. I think if you talk to the wardens, they'll tell you I gave them my word. I believe in the jury system. I've honored their verdict. I've not complained for 9 years. All I've done is try to be helpful and encourage the guys around there, hey man, do your time, fight in court, and don't do anything that's going to extend your time. And that's the life I've tried to live, because I want to get back to my kids and my family.
All right. Do you realize that if you're granted parole, you could be returned to prison for any violation or conditions of parole? Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now,
Yes,
some
sir,
of those
I do.
conditions could be easily as not drinking alcohol to excess, associating with ex-felons, leaving the state without permission, being subject to search and seizure. So there's going to be a whole slew of conditions you're going to have to follow. And do you think you can be successful with the terms of parole?
I'll be on the drink in 9 years, and I haven't missed it. Most of my life, I could be stopped and searched whenever they, I'm not a guy who lived a criminal life. I'm a pretty straight shooter. I've always tried to be a good soldier, and I have no problem, none whatsoever, in living with those conditions.
Here's the other side of that. As an easily recognized person in the community, if you're granted parole, how will you handle public scrutiny in the community?
Well, I've been recognized ever since I was 19 years old. I'm sure Bruce will tell you, wherever we've been, it's always a crowd. This is not new to me. Rarely have I even in the last 20 years, rarely have I even had any person give me any negative stuff in the street. I mean, people give you looks and everything, but I'm pretty easily approachable. I've dealt with it my whole life, and I really don't foresee any problem dealing with the public now at all.
Okay, and Mr. Simpson, we've been, since we've been made aware that you're requesting to live in Florida, I've asked Captain Sean Arudi to come to today's hearing and explain the pre-release and interstate
Roberts,
compact process.
surprisingly unfocused, somewhat self-indulgent testimony from OJ Simpson.
I'm a little surprised because when you talk to a lot of those guys who were with him that night, you know, they talk about, you know, OJ being this larger-than-life personality and having sort of this big ego, and I sort of thought that maybe.
Have a crowd of people that are asking questions. We thought it'd be best to have Captain Arudi present to explain it to everyone.
Thank you. I mean, I could easily stay in Nevada, but I don't think you guys want me here.
No comment, sir.
Good morning, Captain Sean Arudi from the Department of Public Safety, Division of Parole and Probation. As Chairman Bisbee shared with you, I serve two roles. I'm a captain with the Division of Parole and Probation for headquarters, and I also serve as the commissioner for Nevada for the Interstate Compact. When it comes to the Interstate Compact, the things that are looked at is what is your support system in that other state? Are you a resident of the other state as defined by the compact, meaning that you were living there for at least a year prior to the date that you committed the offense? Or do you have resident family there that can serve as your support system? And resident family is fairly specific, but adult siblings and adult children can serve as your resident family sponsor to provide you with that tie to the other state that would allow you to qualify for a transfer. But that's just the first part of it. First, we have to establish what your support system is and whether or not you qualify for that transfer, and then we make the determination if it's in your best interest to request that transfer for you. Once we make that decision, there's an offender application for transfer, which includes a waiver of extradition, which is required to be signed before anyone is allowed to submit a request for transfer to another state. What that does is it outlines to you what the requirements of the compact are, that you're subject to terms and conditions not only by the sending state, which in this case would be Nevada, but also by the receiving state. If you were looking to join your family in Florida, that the Florida would be able to impose conditions on you that would be consistent in the same manner that they would treat one of their own offenders in a like circumstance. From the once that offender application for transfer with the waiver of extradition, and the waiver of extradition serves the purpose that if for some reason you violate the terms and conditions of your supervision, you understand that Nevada has the authority to come and return you to Nevada to answer for those violations. Once we obtain that signed offender application, we will process that along with the other paperwork and documents that we need to submit to the other state, and they will then have up to 45 days to conduct their investigation on whether or not you qualify for the transfer and whether or not you have a valid plan of supervision. Once they determine that, their caseworkers will forward that through their compact office back to the Nevada compact office. And once we have a decision by that other state, then that would be provided to you through your case manager at the Department of Corrections. That's how the interstate compact part works. On the pre-release side, we have pre-release specialists who work closely with the caseworkers at the Nevada Department of Corrections, and they help to develop that valid plan of supervision we were talking about. What is your plan of release? Where do you want to go to? Who's your support system? Once they make that determination, they process the information that's necessary. And in this case, if you were to apply for an interstate compact, our pre-release specialists would be the ones to forward those documents to the other state for their consideration. Once the determination was made and once a valid plan was developed, then they would work with your caseworker to set up your release, and your caseworker would then manage the release through the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Does the panel have any questions for Captain O'Reilly? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Laverne, I'm going to defer to the two of you, you and Mr. Simpson. We'd like Mr. Simpson to be able to tell us anything else he'd like to tell us. We'd also like to hear from one of the supporters if one of them wishes to make a brief statement to the board. And we would also like to hear your statement, Mr. Laverne. So I'm going to put that back to you as to what order you want those three things to happen.
We're going to hear from Mr. Simpson's daughter, Arnell Simpson, first, and then I'll make some closing remarks.
Okay, and Officer Batista, if you will make that switch for us, please.
Thank you.
Hello.
Good morning, ma'am, and if you will give us your name and for the record and your relationship to Mr. Simpson.
Yes, I am Arnell Simpson, my dad's oldest child of 4.
Hey, Ms. Simpson, welcome, and feel free to speak.
Thank you. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me.
So are we.
I know it's a lot. As you know, I'm here on behalf of my family for the purpose of expressing what we believe is the true character of my father. No one really knows how much we have been through this ordeal in the last 9 years. Excuse me. My experience with him is that he's like my best friend and my rock. And as a family, we recognize that he is not the perfect man, but he's clearly a man and a father who has done his best to behave in a way that speaks to his overall nature and character, which is always to be positive no matter what. He has spent the last 9 years in Lovelock, as we all know, and has been a perfect inmate, following all the rules and making the best of the situation, which is truly amazing to me under the circumstances. The choice that he made 9 years ago that resulted in the sentencing were clearly inappropriate and wrong and counterproductive to what he was trying to achieve. As a family, we were all there to celebrate a wedding of a very good friend. As his daughter, I can honestly say my dad recognizes that he took the wrong approach and could not handle the situation. He could have handled the situation differently. My siblings, I, and family know that he didn't make the right decision on that day, but we know that his intentions were not to go in and to just make the wrong decision at the wrong time. Throughout this ordeal, we have remained close. We have stayed strong. And I, for myself, am grateful to God for giving us the strength to get through this last 9 years and to stay positive always, no matter what. And a lot of that is because of him. So on behalf of my family, my brother, my sister, an aunt, an uncle, his friends, We just want him to come home. We really do. We want him to come home, and I know in my heart that he's very humbled throughout the situation. This has been hard. Let me be honest. This has been really, truly hard. And there's no right or wrong way to explain how to handle this. But we do know that, I know that he is remorseful. He truly is remorseful. And we just want him to come home so that we can move forward for us, quietly, but to move forward. So I thank you for allowing me to be here this morning. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. We appreciate you being present and we appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
And Officer Batista, will bring Mr. Laverne and Mr. Simpson back to the table, please.
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Laverne, this would be the time for you and Mr. Simpson to make any closing remarks that you'd like to make.
Commissioner, do you have a copy of a letter I provided through your liaison? It's an undated letter from Mr. Simpson to Assemblyman Osvaldo Fumo. That should have been provided to you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We
So,
do have
all
that
right.
as part of the record.
So give me 2 seconds to get set up here, because that's where I'm going to start. Did you take the letter? I can't find it now. Switch. So. And the letter, as you can see, is very short, so I think it would be appropriate just to read it into the record, if the commissioners would allow me to. Oops.
That'd be fine.
Okay. But the first thing I have to do is find it. Here it is. By way of setting this letter up, by the way, the most important part about this letter is that this was not a letter that Mr. Simpson provided to me, okay? What happened is Mr. Simpson at some point wanted me to communicate with an individual by the name of Osvaldo Fumo. He's an assemblyman now, and prior to that time, and still now, he's an attorney. And in the interest of full disclosure, he actually was one of Mr. Simpson's attorneys during the habeas proceedings related to this case. But since that time, Osvaldo, or Ozzy as I call him, he's a friend of mine too, he became an assemblyman with the Nevada legislature. And after that, Mr. Simpson sent Mr. Fumo a letter, and I found out about that letter, not through Mr. Simpson. I found out about this letter through Mr. Fumo when I was advised to thank Ozzy Fumo for providing some, was it books and some educational equipment to the prison here at Lovelock, Nevada. And so I'm going to read that letter. And by the way, Mr. Simpson did authenticate this letter this morning. I'd only produced this to him this morning when I got to see him prior to this hearing. He did indicate that he was the one who wrote this letter. And even though it's not dated, he indicated it was probably sent to Ozzy within the last 9 months or so. So, dear Legislator Fumo, first of all, allow me to say how happy I was to hear about your new position as a state legislator, although I was not surprised to hear about your interest in furthering the education and helping of prison inmates. I must admit, I've always taken my exposure to education for granted, partly due to my prowess as an athlete. I have always been afforded opportunities for higher education. It wasn't until I got to prison that I realized just how many people did not have the exposure to said education, in part because of their circumstances, i.e. gangs, bad neighborhoods, lack of parental supervision, poverty, etc. But Ozzy, I can't tell you how inspiring it is to see how said inmates have taken advantage of the educational department and the advantages that it offers. I have seen a change in some inmates as far as their self-esteem goes that is amazing. They come to me to talk about subjects that they would have never even thought about before their exposure to education. They talk to me about things they want to do when they are released, things they never would have thought about they were capable of before. They say, quote, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks," end quote, And as a quote, old dog, end quote, my friend, I can tell you that is not true. I am currently taking a computer science course, or just a computer course that has shown me that even I am capable of learning new skills. These new skills, at the very minimum, will help me better communicate with my children. Who knows, you may even see a webcast or blog in my future. I work in the athletic department here at Lovelock, and I fully enjoy what I do and can tell you that this is very important for the inmates to have a release for their energy and for recreation. But I can think of no better place to use state funds than to educate, add to their self-esteem, and to prepare these guys for their eventual release. In closing, I want to tell you how much I look forward to following your political career and your participation in what I know will be a very successful prison educational program. Gratefully yours, Orenthal J. Simpson. And it's signed by Mr. Simpson. And the reason I wanted to read this to you is because, and just kind of surprise Mr. Simpson with it, is because obviously this is Mr. Simpson's, what I would consider one of Mr. Simpson's first opportunities to have clout in the political system of the state of Nevada. He pretty much has an end at that point. He has Ozzie Fumo, who they had an attorney-client relationship with, a very good relationship, and now Ozzie is in the assembly. He's in a position of power. And what does Mr. Simpson do? Does he say, Ozzie, can I have a better bed? Or does he say, Ozzie, can you pull some strings, get me out of here earlier? No, he doesn't do any of that. He uses that clout. The one time he has some clout in the state of Nevada, he uses that clout to obtain funding for books and education in this prison. And some of those men, as Mr. Simpson said, they really are going to get out and they're going to have a decent and a better life for themselves as the result of Mr. Simpson's efforts through Mr. Fumo. I think that's the definition of character. And frankly, I think if it was me personally, who had been in prison for 9 years, and frankly, forget 9 years, 9 days, if I had that opportunity in a position of someone in a position of power who could do something for me like this, I would be saying, get me out of jail, okay? But he doesn't do that. It is very, very, very selfless. He's thinking about the people here, and it's also the definition someone had asked earlier about being humbled and some humility. It also shows a genuine form of humility that he has the capabilities to think of people here who are not as empowered and not as privileged as he has been, and when he gets out, probably will continue to be in society. So that's the first part of my closing remarks. The second part of my closing remarks is to deal with the other individual in this case that was a victim. He's not here. Mr. Fremong is sitting right here, and that's Mr. Beardsley. Mr. Beardsley, as you, I'm sure, are aware, is no longer with us. He passed away in about November of 2015. However, Mr. Beardsley and Mr. Fremong have made calls to my office, and I've spoken to them both at various points. And the last time I recall speaking to Mr. Beardsley was in September of 2011. This is not that long after I'd maybe been representing Mr. Simpson for a couple of years at that point. I was a little uncomfortable that Mr. Beardsley, who is a victim in a case, and my client is considered the person who victimized him, was calling me. So I did explain to him that I wanted to record the conversation. He consented, and I asked him if he wanted an attorney before he talked to me. He said he was fine. I say this, I bring up this recorded conversation because I reviewed it in anticipation of this hearing, and that was from 2011, as I stated before. And since he's no longer here, I think I could just speak from the dead, speak from someone who's speaking from the dead. He indicated in no uncertain terms in that conversation that he had cleared up this matter with Mr. Simpson. He was trying his hardest to do whatever he wanted to get Mr. Simpson out of prison, and they had just made it right. Mr. Simpson had apologized to him, and they had just basically made it right. And he was and he had sent letters to Mr. Simpson and Mr. Simpson hadn't responded, and that was probably on the advice of counsel at the time. And then also there was another issue and Mr. Simpson has raised this issue, and I want to emphasize this again, that Mr. Beardsley had a set of photos, and these are not memorabilia. Mr. Simpson, if he didn't make his point already, he could care less about some signed football or some signed photos. He could care less about it. He could rip them up and burn them up. I know they mean a lot to a lot of people, but that was not what was really the true impetus for what happened here. What was the true impetus is that there were intimate family photos that were taken from him, literally stolen. And there's no dispute that these would not be any type of judgment, collections. These are just intimate family photos. Mr. Simpson had a former family. He had a second family. There's pictures of him with his mother and other things, famous celebrities, and they were not subject to being taken. They probably have no value to most people, but they have all the value in the world of Mr. Simpson. They're not footballs, and that's what set it off. And Mr. Beardsley had these photos, or he at least represented to me on the phone that he had these photos, and I had made every effort that I could to try and obtain those intimate family photos that I was well aware were basically all Mr. Simpson wanted in the first place. Unfortunately, whatever happened, Mr. Beardsley was never able to get those to me. He explained that he had them, and I tried to make every effort to get those from him. And then at some point along the line, we lost contact, and then I just discovered that he had passed away. But I will speak on Mr. Beardsley's behalf from that phone conversation that at least as of September of 2011, him and Mr. Simpson had made things right. Okay. And finally, and again, obviously the commission is not used to hearing where victims are calling people who are in prison their attorneys and having multiple conversations with them. I've also had Mr. Fremont, Bruce Fremont, who's sitting right here to my left and will testify shortly. He's also called my office. He had called before many years ago, and we had spoken, and I can't necessarily remember the substance of those conversations. They weren't recorded, or if they were, I couldn't find them in my files. But he's recently called again. He called me on July 3rd, and he called me on July 14th, and both times I missed the calls, but I called him back. And I can hear that Mr. Fremont has made things, and Mr. Simpson have made things right with each other, that he's accepted Mr. Simpson's apology wholeheartedly. He seems to be a fundamentally really, really good guy who's fallen on some hard times recently. And he told me that he would be coming in and testifying favorably for Mr. Simpson. I made sure I told him probably 15 or 20 times to say whatever he wanted to say, because, you know, obviously Mr. Simpson's attorney talking to a victim, it could be interpreted the wrong way. So again, Mr. Fremont, say whatever you want to say. Nobody's telling you how to testify here. And one of the things that we did, and I did inform the parole and probation about both of those conversations on July 3rd and July 14th. And one of the things that we did spend a lot of time, I mean, that was a small portion of our conversations, was the remorse on Mr. Simpson's part that Mr. Fremont accepted. Most of the time we were talking about some other unfortunate things that happened with Mr. Fremont. I believe, I know because I've researched this now. There was some civil litigation that went on out there, and this was against primarily against one of the uncharged co-defendants in this case, individual named Riccio. Something happened in this civil litigation, and I don't know what's going on with it at this point in time, other than Mr. Fremont addressed those concerns with me. I told him that I would look into it. I explained to him that he really should talk to his lawyers who were involved in that civil litigation to try and make that judgment do whatever he wants it to do. And it was unfortunate. I believe that this kind of is an opportunity to show you that in the criminal case he's completely the victim, but he filed this civil lawsuit, and the jury actually found Fremont 16% liable for what happened here. It was pretty unique, to say the least. In any event, Mr. Fremont is going to testify, but I did feel that I needed to note that I don't think I have a point to prove with Mr. Fremont, other than he did represent that he was going to testify favorably for Mr. Simpson, and that he did discuss with me on multiple occasions this idea of some civil judgment out there that he was hoping that Mr. Simpson could take care of for him. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Simpson, did you have any closing remarks?
I haven't heard any, except that, I've come here, I've spent 9 years making no excuses about anything. I am sorry that things turned out the way they did. I had no intent to commit a crime. I came here, I tell the inmates all the time, man, I don't want to hear about your crime. argue in court. Here we're all convicts. I'm a convict. Do your time and don't do anything to extend your time. I told the warden when I got here, Mr. LaGrange, I think it was, Ms. Carpenter and Ms. Megan, that I would be no problem. I believe in this jury system. I will honor what the jury said, and I will be no problem, and I think I kept my word. As I said, I've done my time. I'd just like to get back to my family and friends, and believe it or not, I do have some real friends, but I don't think I could have represented this prison. I don't think any inmate has ever represented it better than I. I did my time. I tried to be helpful to everybody. And as I said, Bruce and Beardsley, I made up with them years ago, so I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry to Nevada. I wish Ricio had never called me. I thought I was glad to get my stuff back, but it wasn't worth it. 9 years away from your family is just not worth it. And I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just one more thing for the record. Your expiration is, as of today, 9/29/22, and for all those people in the world wonder how that adds up to 33 years in the state of Nevada. Good behavior, complying with the rules, can mean up to a 50% reduction off the back end of your sentence. If granted parole, that September 29, 2022 time could even move closer. So I wanted to put that on the record. And at this point, I'll ask Officer Batista if you will move Mr. Laverne and Mr. Simpson again, and we invite Mr. Furlong to the table, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2007, as you just heard OJ say, he felt he made good with Mr. Furlong many years ago, and now we're going to hear him testify on OJ's behalf.
If you will put your
The record for us, please, and then proceed.
Yes, it is Bruce Furlong, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak today. First and foremost, I'd like to state that I'm not here just as Mr. Simpson's friend of almost 27 years, because that I am. But today I'm also appearing as the victim of the crime on September 30th, or September 13th of 2007. On that day, I felt that Mr. Simpson was misguided, not by himself, but also by Tom Ricio. He was led to believe that on that day there were going to be thousands of pieces of his personal memorabilia, pictures of his wife, from his first marriage, pictures of his kids, Arnell and Jason, family heirlooms. He was told there were going to be possibly his wife's wedding ring, thousands of things. He was misled about what was going to be there that day. A man named Thomas Ricio had promised him this big package. In reality, Thomas Ricio had never met me. Never had met me in his entire life until the night of the robbery. He got there and saw all this stuff. He went down, he got OJ, and instead of telling him that that's not what was there, he brought him up anyway. When OJ got there, unfortunately, he was already worked up and had people with him that were hollering and screaming. There was a lot of commotion going on in a very, very small room. Real small room, wasn't it, OJ? And a lot of things happened very quickly. And unfortunately, if OJ had just said, everybody out of here, OJ, Bruce and I need to talk for a minute, none of this needed to happen. But that didn't happen. And it took one of the things I want to make clear is that it took me 2 years in a California court because in a judge's infinite wisdom, instead of going ahead and turning things into a California court, straightened out. And after having to fight the Goldman's lawyers, OJ's lawyers, and it took me 2 years to get back with over 600 items. A majority of it did come back to me because I had to go back 19 years through our friendship, but I had to go back 19 years, produce records for almost 98% of this stuff. And it is true that items in that room belonged to OJ. There were no two ways about it. But it's also true that I have never stolen anything from OJ. I have never stolen from OJ. I think OJ will admit that I did not ever take anything from you. It wasn't me. An ex-partner of mine and his mistress, Christy Lukemeyer, have taken things. Other people have taken things from OJ, but I have never stolen from OJ. OJ is my friend, always has been, and I hope will remain my friend. But there were things in that room, and I admit to that. I'm sorry things did not work out differently, but there were, and I will make this clear to you, OJ never held a gun on me. There was a coward in that room, a man named McClinton, came up gangster style, acting like a big man. He held the gun on me, not OJ. Another man came in, hit me, not OJ. He never laid a hand on me. A lot of people are yelling, bag that stuff up. Let's get out of here. During the trial, after I testified against OJ, and this is why I absolutely believe him. After I had already testified against OJ, I'd already said everything I had to say. We happened to pass each other in the hallway. He came up to me and said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And we had a chance to talk to each other. And I told him I'm sorry that I did not get the opportunity to call him and tell him that I had that stuff. Those few items that belonged to him, I told him I'm sorry that take the opportunity to call him, because we'd been apart for a long time. We hadn't had a chance to talk for many, many years. And I'd been from Mike Gilbert, and I wish I had of. And he said, "Bruce, sorry, how sorry." And we've got a saying between us, it is what it is. And he put his hand out, and I said, "I forgive you." We all make mistakes. OJ made his. He's been here, and from what I've told, he's been a model inmate. He's been an example to others. During the trial, I recommended that he serve 1 to 3 years. That's what I recommended to the DA. And I'm here to say that I've known OJ for a long time. I don't feel that he's a threat to anyone out there. He's a good man. I know that he does a lot for other people. And I feel that 9.5 to 33 years was way too long. And I feel that it's time to give him a second chance. It's time for him to go home to his family, his friends. This is a good man. He made a mistake. And if he called me tomorrow and said, "Bruce, I'm getting out. Will you pick me up?" Juice, I'll be here tomorrow for you. I mean that, though.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments and we appreciate today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr.
Thank you for this
Laverne
opportunity.
You're welcome. Mr. Laverne and Mr. Simpson, if you'll return to the table, please.
And before we will break for deliberation, I want to
Do they have any other last questions? Anything? Okay. What's going to happen now is deliberation. Again, another thing we do with every single case, but a little differently today because frankly we need our offices back, folks. So we're hoping to deliberate, come to an agreement, and be able to produce an order sometime in the next 30 minutes or so. So what's going to happen is we are going to break and then after deliberating, we'll come back to this room. I'll ask each commissioner to vote. I'll vote myself. If we are able to agree when those votes are cast, that will be a final decision. If it becomes obvious that there is a split on this particular panel, I have Commissioners Eddie Gray and Commissioner Michael Keeler stand by in Las Vegas, and we will call them. They will either cast a vote then or ask for to return to deliberation. So that is what we're planning at this moment. We are about to leave the room. I know Officer Batista is going to arrange to clear the courtroom there also. I ask that here that you give us about 2 minutes to clear out of the room so that you're not chasing us down the hall. And then we'll give you a 5-minute notice that our deliberation is over and that we're ready to cast votes. So on that, I will call this hearing into recess, and we will return after deliberation.
So there you have it. This is going to be quick. You just heard from the chairman, Connie Bisbee, there that the commissioners, the 4 commissioners there in the room, 2 more in Las Vegas, are going to go to a room right next door, deliberate. She said probably less than 30 minutes, and then come back in open session and vote one by one on what they think should happen with O.J. Simpson. If he gets 4 votes for parole, it will be granted. He would be eligible for release as early as October 1st. O.J. probably ended on his strongest note, saying he's sorry, making no excuses. He had no intent to commit a crime and that he's done his time. He also apologized to the state of Nevada. That is where the Lovelock Correctional Center is. Dan Abrams, he did help himself at the end.
Yeah, the closing argument was exactly what his tone should have been throughout, which is accepting responsibility, apologetic. It's not the OJ we heard at the beginning. But look, I think in the end, he's probably still going to get parole. And the fact that it's such a short deliberation, I think, actually helps that. It basically says, we'd already decided what we're going to do. We had all the documents, we had our forms, we had our 11 factors, we had our scores. I think that O.J. Simpson would have had to do something more radically bad than we saw here for him not to get parole. But on the whole, I don't think it was a great performance from Simpson, but not bad enough to fundamentally change
And
the
Deborah Roberts, Bruce Vermong, who was in the room that day, who was one of the victims, also brought tears to the eyes of O.J. when he said, Juice, I will be there for you when you come out.
It was striking, George, because I think that's what people were looking for from O.J. Simpson. They wanted to see that remorse. They wanted to see that humility, those tears. But I think he did open himself up for criticism for later on with so much detail, because a lot of those guys with him that night tell different stories. And did he really need to go down that road to have people debating again what happened? Maybe he should have kept it compact, but it was interesting to see him very much moved at the very end by his friend Vermong.
Matt Gottman outside the Lovelock Correctional Center. What may be going most for O.J. right now is how he comported himself while he was in that prison.
That's right, George. Guards have told us that he said yes, sir, no, sir, was always respectful. And as you heard during the hearing, O.J. did talk about all the things that he did. He was the commissioner of a softball league. He was an umpire. He worked in the gym. He did everything that he should have done. Yes, he was treated with kid gloves at times, but he was respected by the guards, showed them respect. That's not exactly the person we saw today. So it was a little bit shocking, a little bit surprising. However, O.J. has a lot going for him right now, and I think Bruce Fromong was really the ace in his hole, and he probably struck the kind of tone that OJ should have had from the beginning, essentially supporting everything that OJ tried to argue while relitigating the case in the beginning of the hearing. I agree with Dan. It seems like OJ has a pretty good chance at getting parole here, but it was looking touch and go there for a while.
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me, Dan, is in some ways how unprepared OJ was for this. I mean, he knew exactly what was going to happen coming in. He knew which questions were going to be asked. He had an opening statement prepared, and then and even by his own admission, seemed to get confused and went off and relitigated the case.
And even when it came to the closing statement, said, I haven't prepared anything, sort of he hadn't thought it out, etc. That is really hard to believe. You would think that for the last year and a half, he's been thinking about this day, this opportunity, this chance to get out of prison after 9 years. And it felt like he was kind of winging it, which is amazing.
Matt Gutman?
I was just going to add in that one of the most surprising things about OJ's testimony just now was that he said he didn't do that substance abuse problem. It was one of the mitigating factors, one of the aggravating factors that got him in here was that drunken night in Las Vegas in which he made a clearly terrible decision to try to steal back his own memorabilia. They say you serve time, and that's what you have in 9 years in prison. You have a lot of time. Why not take that substance abuse course? That was one of the things that was most surprising to me. OJ Simpson denying flatly that he ever had an alcohol problem, so that maybe he had his kids had struggled with alcohol, then maybe he would have taken that program. But that is clearly something that the board wanted to hear him say, yes, I had a problem, I've taken care of it, it's over now, and my future life as citizen OJ Simpson will be far different than my life previous to my incarceration.
Could have easily helped himself there. He did say that he hadn't had a drink in 9 years and hadn't missed it at all. One of the things not at issue today, not a factor, at least an official factor for the parole board, of course, the killing of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman back in 1994. There was a civil judgment later in 1997 against O.J. Simpson, a $33 million civil judgment. And this morning I had the chance to speak to Ron's father, Fred, and his sister, Kim, about how they would feel as they watch this today. Take a look.
Needless to say, upset. What's troubling to me is not only him, but the whole system gives second chances to violent felons, or for that matter, anyone in jail. Ron doesn't get a second chance.
And Kim, you've said that these last several years with O.J. in prison have been a reprieve. That now may be over.
Yeah, I mean, we lived our life with him walking the streets and sharing the same roads that we did, and with him being locked up in Lovelock, it's been a chance for us to kind of reclaim some control over our life and have some semblance of sanity. So I'm preparing myself for that to be changing come October.
One of the reasons he's likely to get parole is because he was never convicted, as we all know, of the murder, even though that civil jury, 12 jurors found him liable. Now, the parole board doesn't take that into account, but you and your attorneys think they should have.
Absolutely. I think his whole history of violence, ignoring the law, no respect for the law, no remorse for virtually anything he's ever done, is an indication of who he is as a person. I don't think there's any reason to think that he's going to be a decent human being into society. I think he's proved otherwise.
Fred Goldman clearly does not believe that justice will be served here. Dan Abrams, if O.J. is indeed let out of prison on October 1st, the Goldmans will try to collect on that civil judgment. His pensions are safe, but if he earns outside money, perhaps they could get some?
Oh, absolutely. They should get all of it. You know, I was sort of troubled by a reference, I think it was from Bruce Fromong, about sort of the Goldman's lawyers going after him, as if that was some horrible thing. That, can you imagine that the Goldman's lawyer, of course the Goldman's lawyers are going to be going after O.J. Simpson. He owes them $33 million.
And they would argue that it's been rising, that it's actually more than $33 million.
Exactly. And they would say that they actually haven't seen a penny of it because O.J. Simpson, they believe, was signing memorabilia, et cetera, underground, making sure that they never were able to track exactly what he was making. But any money that he officially makes outside of protected money, like a pension, et cetera, would be money that the Goldmans should be able to get access to because they are owed an enormous amount.
We also have on the phone Dr. Henry Johnson, a longtime friend of O.J. Simpson as well. Your reflections on how he did today?
I think OJ handled himself quite honorably. You know, OJ is a strong man. He's a humble man. And I think he did a great job.
And what's your sense of what he will do if he is indeed released?
I think that he will re-embrace with his family and friends, and he will take a pause. He has to, you know, obviously walk the line. He's still going to be on parole, so it will still be under the jurisdiction of the state of Nevada. But OJ has always been, to me, I've known him for over 20 years, and he's always been an upright individual, and I believe he will carry on. As a matter of fact, I believe that OJ will rise once again, and people will recognize that an innocent man has been persecuted for the last 25 years.
But he was found liable for the deaths by a jury of 12 people, a jury of his peers. He does owe the Goldman family, according to that judgment, $33 million. Don't you accept that?
Well, let me say something in honor of the deceased. Because if Ron and Nicole could be here today, they would tell you that you got the wrong guy.
You don't know that.
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why.
Go ahead.
I would tell you this. Contrary to the great American delusion, Nicole spoke to her mother by phone at midnight while OJ signed autographs on the red-eye flight. And they hid the phone records from jury. The jury was only shown some fake, fraudulent phone records that supported Marcia Clark's phony timeline. Nicole and Ron did not get killed until after midnight. And you would have to be an utter, absolute fool to assume that one guy could kill two people at a night with a knife and nobody heard anything.
Dan Abrams,
I'm one of the
covered the trial.
I'm one of the fools. So I'm one of those fools who covered the criminal trial in its entirety, covered the civil case in its entirety. And I think that for those who say we have to accept jury verdicts, then you accept both jury verdicts, right? And the reality is O.J. Simpson was a free man. And the reality is that a civil jury still believed that he was responsible for the killing of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And I think it's really, I think it's disrespectful, actually, to their memories to have comments like this being made, suggesting that the case was all a fraud and this and that. I mean, I could sit here and list for you from the civil case things that came out because O.J. had to testify, things that didn't come out in the criminal case, which make it so much clearer than it was even in the criminal case that O.J. Simpson did it.
I want to go back to Matt Gutman at the Lovelock Correctional Center. Give us some sense of what will happen in these intervening couple of months if indeed O.J. is set for release on October 1st.
He just sits and waits for at least a couple of months here in Lovelock, goes back to his routine, cold cereal in the morning, goes back to the gym, cleans it up, walks around the track whenever he can. But at some point near October 1st, if he does get parole, he'll probably be moved to another facility, probably closer to Reno or more likely Las Vegas. And from there, he'll be released. And again, we probably won't know exactly when he will be released. They'll probably try to do that quietly. And, we won't know exactly where he's going, although the clear indication from that hearing is that he does want to go back to Florida, where he had a home. He lost it to foreclosure, but that's where his two youngest children are, and that is where he likes to play golf. He has a lot of friends, including Tom Scota, who was there in the room and says he will help take care of O.J. He's one of the people who said that had O.J. been with me that night, I would have taken care of him. So that's what we think he's going to do.
What we will know, likely within the next 30 minutes, is whether O.J. Simpson will indeed get parole from that Board of Commissioners, the Nevada Parole Commission. It takes 4 votes. You saw the commissioners there. There are 2 others in Las Vegas. They are deliberating now. We will come back when they have a decision. Stay with us.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
looked down, looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. I don't believe he cried, but I know he was emotional. You saw him when he returned back to the desk, and you can assess the red eyes at that point. That was probably the most emotional of the hearing. The hearing was somewhat tense at the beginning until a laughter icebreaker, and I'd have to go back to my notes that are not here, but you saw it, and you saw that part of that. Question? I'm here and willing to answer any other questions for a couple of minutes. I would very much like to get with my desk so that I can continue filing a report that appears to have gotten a little bit hung up. I'm hopeful that the AP report is rolling. Do I think OJ was at ease in this situation or nervous? It's hard to characterize Mr. Simpson as at ease in this situation. I covered him at trial in Las Vegas. I know him in relative comfort when he's talking with friends and his attorneys in court hallways. This is not that. Mr. Simpson's freedom is on the line. He clearly knows it. And he clearly wanted to tell the board that he would do well if he's released. He also was, the word may not be adamant. I thought he was forceful and leaned forward at one point about not, I believe it was about not knowing that guns were in the room, and that material and that the items that were taken were his. He has maintained throughout that the items that they were after, that he went there to retrieve from Bruce Framong and Alfred Beardsley, were his belongings, family photos. You heard those things. You saw Arnell and heard what Arnell said and how she delivered it. She came prepared with yellow note paper. She was steady as she read, and then returned to her seat next to Miss Shirley Baker, and they hugged. And Miss Arnell dabbed her eyes with a tissue. I think she was quite emotional at that point, at the release of having read the statement that she had prepared.
Sorry, could you spell your name again for me?
First name Ken, K-E-N, last name Ritter, R-I-T-T-E-R, and I'm with the Associated Press. I'm very glad to help you today. If you can let me go and do some of my work, I might be able to help you more. Thank you all. like mine went. Oh, they went.
Good or bad?
Good.
You guys are rolling on that.
Am I hogging bandwidth from you?
I just unblocked it. So now you both have to close it on it.
Clean this shit down, restore it.
What's up, Ken?
I was just stopping to say hello.
All right. Well, hey.
I had some transmission issues.
Transmission issues for what? Oh, I thought you were a
From the
car?
pool. No.
Oh, you're talking about transmission. You gotta
And
talk
I-
to me like
and I
a
went out to-
layperson. I need transmission. I thought your car went out on you.
And I went out to speak with the media. When I do that, the next time I do that, it will be right after the decision. Do you want to come out also?
Maybe.
Come with me. It'd be a good idea.
I'll
Bring
see.
Arnell.
No, that's not happening. It's not happening.
And Tony.
Not happening.
Please come with me.
No, I might, but the other things you're talking about aren't happening.
Or any surprises on this? Can I quote you saying anything here?
No, yes, sir.
No, let's just let them have their decision, okay?
This is Ms. Sholey Moll. She
I'm
works
at
for
the
the
state.
state.
If you need anything.
She's also taking photos, so she has your images.
Yes.
If she just,
Keep in mind,
I was going to say the letter.
you're the Associated Press, and I'm still leery of you. There's like the New York Times, right? And then like Associated Press is probably somewhere there. And I'm still leery of you. So, but the letter, I already told you about the letter.
Are we
It's
recording?
been communicated. That doesn't bother me. I come from truth, so it doesn't matter whether it's hot or not.
If you're recording,
I mean, the
before recording,
the letter's already
first
been,
go
the
with
letter's
everything.
already been dealt with. I told you that. The letter's been dealt with.
The letter she signed today?
Oh, that one. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, that was fortuitous.
Can you share it? Can I take a copy?
No.
For
You
accuracy's sake?
can get a copy of it.
Okay, well, this is your 5-minute warning. They're going to be coming back in with the...
I won't provide okay, listen, I won't provide a copy at this time. Check with me another day and I may, but my inclination is to say no. Did you see me leave anything out there? I had my bag, but I don't have my quarters. I got my quarters. I got my quarters. Got my folders. I got it. That was.
5 minutes.
Do you have a watch on your ward?
No, I turned my phone off.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cool.
So I was scared it would work.
Okay. Do I have all my quarters? That's the problem. I got.
I'm going to make this mic live.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I got that.
Ask Brooke. She knows what I'm asking.
Are they bringing them in again? Okay. They're not live yet.
Sit.
Yeah, take a seat.
Are we ready?
Well, talk to you. I could talk to him after.
The warden has to approve everything.
I can't even talk to him after.
Not happening. I already tried.
Yeah. My best dude.
Thanks for staying with us this afternoon. This is Laura Harris with ABC Action News. What you've been watching is the OJ Simpson Parole Board hearing. The Parole Board is now deliberating, and we were just given the 5-minute warning that they are about to come back. I mean, this has been pretty quick, just about 15 to 20 minutes that they've been deliberating, a lot longer than what the actual hearing was. The hearing was about an hour long. What was interesting about that hearing, if you weren't able to watch the entire thing, it wasn't until about 30 minutes in that we actually heard OJ Simpson say he's sorry for what happened. He's sorry about how it happened, that incident back in 2007. So he's been in prison for 9 years in Nevada. He's now up for parole. If he is granted parole today, he would be eligible to get out as early as October 1st of this year. There was also some talk in that parole hearing that there's a chance that OJ Simpson could be coming back to Florida. The question might be, well, how is he allowed to cross state lines if he's on parole, where there are some, there is a way that could happen, but basically the parole board would have to say that that was okay for him to be able to come to Florida, especially if he's got family here. And now ABC News has a special report for us.
And we are coming back on the air right now because we've gotten the word from the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners that they will be returning to their hearing room in just about a minute to let us know what is going on in their decision on whether or not to give OJ Simpson parole. You see him right there. He's there awaiting a decision. He'd been looking a little more relaxed in the last couple of minutes since his testimony. But obviously this has to be a nerve-wracking moment for him. Spent 9 years in prison for that armed robbery in 2007. The 1994 killings of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman not at issue here, not something the Board of Commissioners will consider. See OJ having a little bit of a laugh right there. He was a little more tense in his exchanges with the commissioners, went on for about 30, 35 minutes. His daughter, Arnell Simpson, very moving testimony on his behalf. Let's listen in on OJ right now.
He's your savior. Who would believe anyone with a mullet like that died here?
Joking.
Yeah, he's the one and only. That's for sure.
His longtime friend and victim of the robbery, Bruce Vermont, also giving testimony on OJ's behalf during that hearing, which went under an hour. You see the stress on his face now.
And so I just think it's just a disgrace.
He was paroled.
This guy was never even assigned to my portion of the prison, ever.
No, he wouldn't be able to spot yourself.
You know, when I would see him, is when we would go to the store. We would go in the canteen. I guess he'd come out of that area and he'd stand at the fence and tell us these crazy stories. I mean, it's funny, I give him that. But about how he got kicked out of his son's baseball game and how he was refereeing. And,
seems to be talking about a former fellow prisoner.
The guy's
at Lovelock.
You know, but outside of that, I don't know. His judge says I got a shrine in my room, and he walks me in the yard. I mean, the guy is, and he's shameless. Jesus.
Apparently he's talking about a guard there, I've been told.
Well, I like the fact that when it seems like he's running out of material and they have no more interest in him, he has new
commissioners
things that he
entering
can
the room
explain about.
right now. These are the same commissioners, Dan Abrams, who did grant OJ's parole on certain portions of the crime back in 2013.
Right, it's for the same six that were evaluating last time in 2013. He was deemed to be a low risk at that point, and as a result was granted parole on a number of the charges, which is the main reason why so many of us believe it's likely that he will be granted parole again now.
And let's hear from Chairman Connie Bisbee.
I mean, seriously, who cuts a line in person, man? You find yourself 6 feet under.
You guys, I may say something publicly after that, but I'm glad I have you on here because Mr. Simpson's always...
Call this parole hearing on Orenthal James Simpson back in... are we ready to vote, folks?
Chairman Bisbee, I'll start off. Mr. Simpson,
You organized this crime in which 2 victims were robbed at gunpoint. It was a serious crime, and there was no excuse for it. You deserve to be sent to prison. You've been in prison now almost 9 years, the minimum amount imposed by the court. You have complied with the rules of the prison. You have programmed in an acceptable manner. You have no prior conviction of criminal activity. You are low risk to reoffend on our guidelines. You have community support and stable release plans. We've heard from you and from your victim. The question here, as with all parole hearings, is whether or not you have served enough time in prison on this case. Considering all of these factors, my vote is to grant your parole effective when eligible.
Thank you.
And I concur with Commissioner Korda and grant parole. And in addition, our decision, although difficult, is fair and just.
I concur with Commissioner Korda and agree to grant parole.
Mr. Simpson, before I cast my vote, I want to let you know that we believe that we're a fair board. We believe that we're a consistent board. I will let you know that consistency also goes to parole. And we do not look kindly upon parole violations. And if I cast my vote to grant and it concludes the hearing, our expectation would be that you not violate even the simplest condition of parole. Having said that, I am prepared to cast a vote. I am prepared to ask the commissioners to set conditions. If that happens, we will produce an order sometime in the next 15 to 20 minutes that will be faxed to you or presented to you at the institution, and it will become a public record. So based on all of that, Mr. Simpson, I do vote to grant parole when eligible, and that will conclude this hearing.
Thank you.
Unanimous by the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners. An emotional OJ Simpson will go free on October 1st. Looks like he was signaling to his friend Bruce Vermong there that he'd be getting a call, perhaps his daughter. Dan Abrams, the commissioners there at pains to say that they were following their own regulations, telling the people of the state of Nevada and the United States that they were being fair and just.
Yeah, look, I think this is sort of comparable to an appellate court argument where they've read the briefs ahead of time, they know what the arguments are going to be, and the proceeding itself, the arguments become a bit pro forma. I think they had pretty much made their decision coming into this, that according to their 11 factors here, that OJ Simpson should be granted parole. And if you look at it through that prism, it's the right decision as a technical, legal parole matter. I think there were many hoping that they would stray a little bit and that they would expand the definition of aggravating factors and potentially consider, for example, the civil judgment, the fact that in the late 80s, O.J. Simpson was accused of domestic violence, et cetera. But none of that came into play. And so in the end, I think that as a technical matter, it ended up being a pretty straightforward, somewhat easy decision for this parole board.
And no mention at all of anything that happened before that armed robbery in Las Vegas back in 2007. Deborah Roberts, clearly he was helped there by the victim, Bruce Vermong. But what I'm thinking about now is that October 1st, O.J. Simpson is going to leave prison after 9 years. still one of the most famous men in the world.
Still one of the most famous men, but also one thing that struck me there, George, is he's also much older. He's 70 years old, and that had to have some bearing, too. When he leaned over, you saw the gray hair. He still obviously looks pretty fit, but he's an older man, but also still, as you say, very famous and still very charming. Even some of those guys who were with him that night who don't feel that happy about O.J. Simpson still see him as somebody that they regard somewhat highly.
And perhaps anticipating this day, look at the difference between 2013, that first parole meeting when he had no chance of being released, and today, 2017, a man in much better shape despite his 70 years. Matt Gutman, he spent a lot of time on that the last few years in prison.
One of the things that OJ has struggled with is diabetes, and you saw him maybe joking about eating all those cookies for the past couple of years. Clearly, he's cut back on whatever sugar he's been eating. He is in far better shape. He has been exercising. You saw him trying to hobble around the hearing room. He is not in excellent shape in terms of the conditions of his knees after so many years of playing football. But clearly he has been trying to exercise, perhaps, George, in anticipation of being granted parole. He certainly seemed very confident in the moments leading up to it. Think about it. The fate of this man was in the hands of that parole board. They could have made a decision to keep him in jail for up to 3 more years. I don't think he thought for a moment that that was going to happen.
That parole board, Matt Gutman, pretty conscious of the fact that O.J. Simpson is going to leave the state of Nevada, head back to Florida.
That's right, and they saw it coming, and he has petitioned for it, and that's something they're going to make. They're going to help him to try to do. He's got to remain in contact with a probation officer, both in Florida and in Nevada. And again, the very clear that he cannot violate any of these parole obligations that he's under, and he could get sent back to prison if he does. And of course, Mr. Simpson said that he will abide by every one of those rulings.
One of the big questions now, Dan Abrams, what does O.J. Simpson do with that fame? What does he do when he returns to the state of Florida? Does he indeed simply spend time with his family or, again, become something of a public celebrity?
Look, I think he can't personally stay away from the limelight. I think that he is going to go out. I think he's not going to just hide underground. And as a result, I think he's going to create controversy in his wake.
And one of the things you did see today, perhaps speaking as much to the public as he was to the parole board, a real determination to still want to make his case and explain himself.
Yeah, and to basically say that the mistake he made was going there. That's it. He shouldn't have gone. But beyond that, he doesn't seem really ready to accept the details of what happened. But let's be honest about this. O.J. Simpson had the book thrown at him. The 9 to 33 years on these particular charges is really a tough sentence in connection with Nevada law. It doesn't mean the judge was out of bounds, but it was a very tough sentence.
And October 1st, he will go free. O.J. Simpson free on October 1st. That's the decision of the Nevada Parole Board. We're going to have much more tonight on World News Tonight with David Muir. And you can get the latest breaking news anytime by downloading the ABC News app. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
I got